Good morning. Thank you for being here. We'll get started in a few minutes. Good morning, Mr. Funk.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. We have a few attendees already joining us. We'll get
Great.
started in a few minutes.
Depending on the timing, Teresa, I'm going to jump off at 10 because I have a meeting with San Jose State at 10.
Okay, we should be done by then. This is scheduled for about 55 minutes, maybe, depending on.
Gotcha. All right.
Thank you. If you're just joining us, we'll get started in a few minutes. It's about 8:58 right now, so we'll give folks a few more minutes to join on. Thank you for being here. Welcome. Okay, about another minute before we get started, just allowing some folks to log on and join us. Okay, it is now 9 o'clock. I want to go ahead and honor everyone's time. Thank you for being here this morning with us. My name is Teresa Marquez, and I'm the Associate Superintendent for Educational Services here for Eastside. And with me as a co-host is our superintendent, who I'll let him introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. Chris Funk, Superintendent, starting my 9th year, and thank you so much for attending this morning. This is a amazing year because we have a lot to get through, particularly with this pandemic and figuring out how best to serve our students. And your voice is critical to figuring that piece out while we're in distance learning and once we have the ability to bring kids back for in-person instruction. So thank you for your participation today.
Thank you, Mr. Funk. So this particular community forum is to focus on our learning continuity and attendance plan for this school year, given that the situation with the COVID-19 pandemic has led for us to begin the school year in distance learning, and thus there are some various requirements that we need to adhere to. But before I want to get started, I do want to inform all our attendees that this session is being recorded. Additionally, we're going to invite you to please use the Q&A icon that should be located at the bottom of your screen of the tab for this particular webinar to post any questions that you have, and we'll towards the end of this particular presentation make sure that we go through the Q&A and answer as many questions as possible. So I do invite you to please locate the Q&A icon located on your menu bar on your screen and use that to input your questions. Currently, we are a small group, so also you can also use your raise hand icon if you do have a question, and we will do our best to identify the raised hand and give you an opportunity to pose your question. So thank you again for being here this morning, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I want to start this particular session by sharing with you that as a district, even during these challenging, uncharted situations, we still continue to seek to build equitable communities for all our students. In particular for us, those equitable communities mean that all our students are welcomed as they are. And even though we're not able to engage with them in person, we still want to make sure that they feel welcomed, whether it's through a Zoom video conferencing or through the posting of assignments. We want to ensure that they continue to feel connected and welcomed as part of our community. Additionally, we want to continue to use data to understand what the strengths of our students are, what their areas of growth are, and be able to not only know them and identify them, but to be able to support them. In particular, during these times where we know that it's different to be in a video conference session than being in person. We want to be able to continue to positively respond to whatever those needs are that our students bring, whether they be social, emotional, wellness, or academic. And we want to make sure that we're responding to those in a positive manner so that we can continue to stay connected with our students. And finally, in the classroom, we want to make sure that students continue to feel engaged with assignments, tasks, projects that still prepare them to have those strategic thinking skills that are going to allow them to find success once they leave us, whether it be at a university, college, the workforce, wherever it is that they may be, so that they can fully participate, whether it be in their local community or the global society. And so even though this start of this school year looks very different than what any of us have ever experienced, we continue to stay strong on our path to continue to build these equitable communities. It just may look a little different than what we've been used to, but we still want to make sure that the commitment that we make to you, our community, about ensuring that we build equitable communities continues to be that same commitment. Now, a little bit about this actual plan. Many of you, possibly if you've been keeping track with our communication in the years past, have heard of what was once called the LCAP, which could be a little deceiving, I will say, because it has the same acronym as this particular, the same starting letters as this particular new plan. But I do want to say that the LCAP that we've been used to, which is the Local Control Accountability Plan, has been suspended for this year. And so what is being presented to us as part of the California Department of Education for this particular school year is what they're calling the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan, which I've chosen to abbreviate as LCP to try to avoid some confusion with our previous LCAP plan. In particular, because of our school closures back in the spring on March 13th, the California Department of Education, in conjunction with the state of California, the governor's office, came out with a Senate Bill 98, which is requiring all LEAs, and that means all districts, all local educational agencies, which is all school districts, to adopt this learning continuity plan by September 30th. In particular, this particular plan has to be presented at a board meeting for feedback and for public comment, and then at a second board meeting will need to be adopted. For us, our timeline is that this will happen at the September board meetings. And once this plan has been approved by our board, then we would submit it to our County Office of Education. This particular community forum is to share with you our initial draft of the plan, and then allow you to provide some questions, some areas for clarification, some ideas that you feel we should continue to work on and or put as part of our plan. And so that's why we're hosting these community forums, to allow for stakeholder input as we continue to work on this plan. But again, this particular plan is what came out as part of the Senate Bill 98, which does require us to respond to certain elements now that we're starting this school year different than what we're used to. So just want to share with you some key timelines. It actually is a very short timeline that we're expected to turn this plan around. The plan was adopted on August 5th by the California Department of Education, and it was sent out to all districts to begin the process. And the process begins with drafting the plan based on actions that we started taking back in March, back when our schools closed. And so using any feedback or any data that we collected, such as survey data, that we actually were able to conduct with our community to begin to draft that particular plan. Then we're expected to have stakeholder engagement sessions, which this is one of them, to be able to provide you with, like I said, our initial plan, as well as update the plan based on whatever feedback it is that we collect from these various community forums. We met already yesterday with our DAC-DLAC group to collect feedback and collection of questions. And this is a governing board that consists of members from each site, school site council, as well as parents of English learners. And so that just took place yesterday. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have to present this plan both for a public hearing at one of our board meetings, which will happen on September 3rd. And then the plan will be brought back for adoption on September 24th at this second September board meeting. And then finally, we would submit it to the County Office of Education. And so as you could see, the timeline is very short, from August 5th to September 30th, a little bit over a month to be able to ensure that we have all these components in place. Now, a lot of times, some of the plans that come out of the California Department of Education as part of some sort of response to a bill, which is this case, are sometimes looked at as either an add-on or something separate, something not connected to the work that we're doing. But for us, we really want to take a different approach. We want to take an approach that we look at this plan through the lens of how is it connecting and how is it supporting our work around equitable communities. And what you have here is the correlation or the connection between what we're being asked to do in terms of the plan and our definition of equitable communities. And you could see here, if you look on the right-hand side, the plan basically wants all districts to ensure that we have access for all students. That's in direct correlation with what we want for our students, which is for all of them to be able to feel welcomed. How will they feel welcomed? By ensuring that they have access to their instruction and feel connected to the school. The plan wants to make sure that we address the social, emotional, wellness, and academic needs of every student. For us, that's almost word for word the same language that we have in terms of what we're striving to do across our district, which is to ensure that we're responding to those various needs of our students. The plan wants us to ensure that we re-engage students based on data, meaning if we find that a student's not attending, if we find that a student is not participating, then how is it that we're responding? So how do we use the data points to identify what are the areas of growth that we need to support our students so that they feel they can reconnect or re-engage? Again, that's very much aligned with our work around building equitable communities. And finally, the plan expects us to ensure that we are providing access to a full curriculum that is very similar in quality, regardless of how we're delivering it. And so again, that is in direct correlation with us ensuring that our students, even though it's in a distance learning setting, through video conferencing, through online resources, that students are still experiencing the opportunity to that full curriculum, and in particular, those projects, assignments, tasks that are gonna allow them to be able to develop those strategic thinking skills. And so as you can see here, the expectations of the learning continuity plan are very much in alignment with our work towards building equitable communities. And for us, this is important because we don't want to just write a plan for the sake of writing the plan. We want to make sure that it continues to be responsive and aligned to what we're trying to do as a district, which is creating Eastside equitable communities. Additionally, we want to pull out some key questions that we know need to be responded and that we've actually developed as an organization for what we want to make sure that we address as we're drafting this plan and as we're providing the input. And these are important questions that are also directly correlated to how we have to respond to this particular plan that we'll have to submit. And the first one is very important, and it's a very overarching question for us. And that is, how do we build safe, supportive, engaging classroom culture and develop authentic relationships within the distance learning model? Given that we started our school year in a distance learning model, for us, it still becomes important to look at how we can continue to support our students, have them feel safe, and have them be engaged in their classroom. We know that we have to respond to this very important question around curriculum and pacing. How do we make sure that our students still have access to the content in a manner that is going to pull out for them the most essential skills and competencies that they have to have in order to be able to progress from one course to the next? We also want to look at what are those instructional models, the platforms, the tools within this distance learning model. We've tried as a district to minimize the various platforms to allow our community, our students, our parents, our community to be able to have it be a little bit easier for them to navigate through this distance learning model. And so for us, our teachers are using School Loop, Google Classroom as their main platform for communicating with students about assignments, communicating with parents about grades and progress. And then in terms of the video conferencing, teachers are either just using Zoom or Google Meet. So again, we try to simplify the number of platforms and tools used so that we can really use them in a way that would be able to allow for increased engagement and consistency across our district. How will we use formative assessments to guide instruction? Again, right, that's a big question that a lot of our teachers have when it comes to assessing students. And so we're pushing for teachers to be able to use more formative assessments, which means that they're checking as part of the learning what kids are understanding, what they're not understanding, and then designing interventions so that they are able to then provide support. I know there's a lot of questions, I'm sure, from many of our parents and our students around our grading practices. How are students going to be graded to ensure that they're being measured accurately while taking into consider that our students have various lived experiences. We know that this pandemic has caused trauma in everyone. And then for us in particular here in our area, the fires have further exacerbated some conditions for many of our communities. So we want to recognize that we have to be flexible and understanding to be able to meet those needs that come with just the situation that we currently are in. And teachers are finding various ways to ensure that they're measuring student learning so that the grade is reflective of students' level of mastery, proficiency, and that there's room for students to also demonstrate it in a number of different ways. Of course, if you remember, many of you probably back to the spring, you know that the attendance aspect of it and the participation was a little bit less structured than we have it now, but definitely for the opening of our school, we have a very structured schedule where each student is expected to report to their periods on the given days as per the schedule, and attendance is being taken. And so we'll be able to pull reports to show our level of attendance, to show which students aren't attending so that we can then have further outreach for those students. And then of course, starting to look whenever it's possible to bring in some special populations for extra supports or even in-person instruction. Obviously, we're still on the state's watch list, meaning that we're unable to provide in-person instruction at this time. But we are trying to identify ways to support students who are at need, even if it's just with the space, because they may need space or Wi-Fi for our most vulnerable populations. And then of course, what are all the skills and resources that we're going to need to ensure that all of this happens? And so I wanted to take you through these questions so that you can see that we are thinking of various different components that go into starting a school year in the way that we've started it through distance learning.
Ms. Marquez, let me just add briefly also that, these questions came out of our lessons learned last spring, because we know we had some unintended consequences when we created the grade floor, where a student could not lower their grade because of distance learning and also raise it. They could only raise it, improve it. Well, two conditions, unintended consequences. One, the engagement level we know dropped after that first month. And by May, it was really low because if a student was happy with their grade, they could choose to just stop engaging. As well as because we were not progressing through the curriculum, not all teachers continued with rigorous tasks for our students. And a lot of the tasks that they gave were just remedial, just to give them opportunities to improve their grade. And so we wanted to make sure we created a much stronger plan for the fall. And when we look at the attendance, prior to COVID-19, on average across the district, we have a 95.6% attendance rate the previous year. And currently the first 2 weeks of school, our lowest, the first day was 93.5%. And just yesterday it jumped to 96%. So we've been averaging, it's been climbing each day. And so really appreciate your support and getting our students engaged, knowing that their grades can now fluctuate. And then as well as our teachers being prepared from the get-go to not only build relationships, but to start working towards and through the curriculum that's necessary for this semester.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Funk. And the reason why we share those questions with you too is so that you can look at how aligned and correlated we actually have been in our planning with what has come out from the California Department of Education. And so as Mr. Funk mentioned, not only did those questions come out of lessons learned from the spring and even just the input from our community in terms of what they wanted to see, it came from us being strategic and intentional about our planning for how we were going to start this school year. And to our benefit, it resulted in a direct correlation and alignment with what we're being asked to do now as part of this learning continuity and attendance plan. So for this next piece, what I want to take you through is each of the components that we are expected to respond to, so that you can see, again, the correlation between not only our vision for equitable communities, but the questions that we posed as part of our planning that we were hoping to be able to have the lens to plan for the opening, and so that you can see the various pieces that we still have to work on. And so one of the major components is stakeholder engagement, making sure that we've done efforts to reach out to our families, to our community, including our community that speak languages other than English, so that they can not only be informed about our plans and our progress, but so that you can actually post questions and offer feedback to this particular plan. And as you can see, as part of our stakeholder engagement efforts, we've decided to split our community forums into our 3 primary languages that we serve here in Eastside. And so English, we begin today. There's 3 opportunities for our community to engage with us. This is the first one for today. We have one at noon and then one later this afternoon at 4. For our Vietnamese speaking families and community members, those will begin tomorrow, August 27th, where we will have one at 1 p.m., 4 p.m., and then we're opening one up on Saturday at 1 p.m. for our Vietnamese families. And then for our Spanish speaking community, we start those today, pretty much in between the English ones. So we'll have one at 10:30, one at 2 o'clock, and then one on Saturday, August 29th at 11 a.m. So we wanted to make sure that we provided various opportunities for our communities to be able to engage in a way that felt meaningful for them. And we thought that providing them in their primary language would be important for our community members. The next component that we have to respond to as part of the learning continuity and attendance plan is our plan towards moving towards in-person instructional offerings. Again, I want to emphasize that currently Santa Clara County is on the state's COVID watch list, meaning that we have a number of COVID cases where the state has deemed that it is necessary to place us on this watch list, which means that we are not allowed to provide in-person instruction to our students at our school sites. Now, that doesn't mean that we cannot provide supervision for our students who are home insecure or homeless, or our foster youth, or our most vulnerable populations that need a space or access to internet, and they qualify based on having a high need And so we are able to continue to provide that particular service to our most at need student populations. But we will be planning, once hopefully we move into a different phase and we're off the state's watch list, to begin to look at what would that in-person instructional offerings look like. And in particular, as is required by this particular plan, the emphasis would be on students who have experienced significant learning loss and our most vulnerable population. So this could be our English learners, our students with disabilities, and other student populations that are considered to be the most at need and most potentially suffer from learning loss. And then the biggest component or the biggest key piece for us right now in terms of our planning is the current motto that we have. And that is our distance learning program. And so particular to that, we have to make sure that we respond to how we're continuing our instruction within each of our courses. What is the access that we have for our students to devices and connectivity? How will we be measuring participation and progress? What's the professional development that we have done for our teachers so that they're able to successfully engage in distance learning model? What are some staff roles and responsibilities that we've had to shift or change to accommodate the various needs now within a distance learning program? And then how do we continue to support our students who have unique needs? After the next slide, I'm going to go ahead and stop, and I'll open up the Q&A to see if there's some questions that we could begin to address before moving on. And then finally, these are the other pieces that are part of the plan. We have to address what are the actions and strategies that we're taking to address learning loss for students, as well as accelerating learning for other pupils. In particular, looking at our English learners, our low-income students, our students in foster care, or our students who are experiencing homelessness. Again, we're having to address how it is that we're responding to students' mental health needs and social emotional well-being. And you could see all these words are probably sounding familiar to you because they cut across our definition for equitable communities, as well as those key questions that we used in our planning for the start of this school year. Of course, we have to respond to how we're working with students who maybe aren't connecting. We're having to find out, why are they not connecting? What is it that they need for them to be connected? School nutrition, the expectation is that we continue to provide meals for students who continue to qualify for free or reduced lunch. And then of course, what are other services that we're providing for our most at need populations, which include our foster youth, English learners, and low income students. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and pause for a minute to take some of the questions here. And so I'm going to open up the Q&A.
Yeah, under the chat, one of the questions was, has the teachers union aligned with our plan? And fortunately, our partnership with the union, we actually signed our MOU back in July. And we were one of the first districts in Santa Clara County to actually complete their MOU, and other districts are using our template for their districts. The other question was around hotspots. You know, we've ordered several thousand hotspots beyond what we gave out last spring. And hotspots are a premium. They're hard to get. But we've also opened up all of our campuses where students can come into the library, the student unions, multi-purpose rooms. If they don't have connectivity, or if there's too many siblings at once trying to get on, as well as if they don't have a safe or quiet place to study, we're bringing a group of cohorts in where they can actually do their distance learning at the school site. And you just simply have to put a request into the school for that.
Great, thank you, Mr. Funk. And so some of the questions in the Q&A, so there's a question about how are we ensuring that students have IEPs, are getting the support and tools necessary to meet and exceed their goals in their education plan. Some special education students need additional support with the one-to-one aid. And so for those students who, as part of their IEP, have those specific supports that are added to their IEP, whether it's a one-to-one or whatever additional accommodations or modifications are, we are still obligated to continue to provide those. And so we continue to work with our teachers, our program specialists, our school psychologists to ensure that those our IEPs are implemented as written. And so if you have a student with a disability and you feel that you need additional support with ensuring that the IEP is met, we still hold our IEP meetings. So I encourage you to seek out your case manager so that we can make sure that we definitely are still continuing to provide those services so that they are meeting their goals. There's a question around why a Saturday meeting for Vietnamese and Spanish speakers and not the English speaking community. That was simply, that's how we've been doing them. And in the past, it worked out for, we had quite a big turnout for our English ones during the week, but we're more than happy based on calendars to offer a Saturday one if that would meet the needs of our English speaking community as well. There's a question around if we're on the statewide watch list, why are we having sports cohorts at the school instead of providing in-person instruction?
Yeah, I'll be glad to answer that one. It's interesting, as you all know, we are competing with different agencies. We have the County Department of Health that we follow their guidelines. You have the state Department of Health, and of course you have CDC and the overall the White House that talks about how to respond to COVID-19, and we have to respond to the most restrictive. So sometimes the state will be more restrictive than Santa Clara County, and sometimes Santa Clara County will be more restrictive than the state. But in the case of athletics, that is treated as an after-school, almost like a summer program, summer camp program, and there are different guidelines for that. Because of being on the watch list, we're not allowed to do direct instruction. The athletes are only allowed to condition or do skill work where they cannot, they still have to be 6 feet apart. They can't have any kind of physical contact with each other. And the instructor has to have a mask on, and they have to be outdoors. And so that's quite different than the ability to actually teach within a classroom. And when you look at the high school level and you have, 3,000 students at Independence and Evergreen Valley, you just can't put all 3,000 students outdoors, socially distanced, 6 feet apart. So there are two separate guidelines that come out from public health.
Thank you, Mr. Funk. And then a question around supporting learning loss that has happened in this last year for various courses, particularly math, foreign language, and how are we addressing this? So what we encourage our teachers to do and what we work with them as part of the professional development is to use the first 2 weeks, which many of our teachers have done, to assess a student need, to build relationships, to look at where the gaps were for our students, to be able to then do some review to get them caught up to where the next level. So if a student last school year was taking Spanish 1, right, for all intensive purposes, March 13th, due to the closures, depending on the level of engagement, we've told teachers that, it's a different year. And so because we don't know, as Superintendent Funk has mentioned, the level of engagement from the spring was very different given we established the grade floor to support students. Teachers are having to do a lot of different formative assessments to ensure that they're able to identify where the gaps are and be able to fill those gaps so that students can progress, especially in sequential courses such as math and foreign language. And I just want to clarify, when I talk about vulnerable populations, I recognize that all of our students may have be vulnerable in one area or next, but in terms of the definition as per the California Department of Education, and in particular for this plan, they particularly call out the student populations of foster youth, English learners, and low-income students to make sure that we are clearly spelling out what it is we're doing for those student populations. But it's not to say that we're only doing it for those students, but we do have to definitely call out those strategies for those particular groups of students. And so let me go ahead and get back to sharing my screen so we can continue, since I believe we caught all the questions there. And so for this next piece, and this will really be our final piece here, is I want to actually share with you our initial draft. And it is very much draft. I will just want to preface that by saying that because obviously we've just started our community forums, you'll see that there are areas that have not been completed and are left blank because we have to make sure that we collect input from our communities. And so what I'm going to take you through is very briefly through the actual template, the actual plan that we have to submit, and take you through just some of our overall responses that we've begun to address. And then I'd like to come back to the group and give you an opportunity not only to pose your questions in the Q&A or in the chat, or even just to offer your input or feedback with the following in mind. One, anything that you liked about our responses up to that point for the plan, anything that you're wondering about. And then really just going through the lens of what questions have surfaced for you as we are navigating through this plan, and then what areas need further clarification. And so I'm going to go ahead and take you through the plan. And again, just want to emphasize that this is very much in draft form. You know, we're still obviously working on the various components for this plan as we navigate through our community forums to ensure that we're collecting input. So the first part of the plan asks for us to give a general description of the impact of the pandemic. And so what I note here of what I'll highlight is that the main reason why early on we started planning for preparing for distance learning was because our community, in particular our 95127 zip code, which represents one of our largest zip codes for us in the East Side, was amongst the highest impacted by COVID cases in the county of Santa Clara. And then in particular, when you look at our demographics, a majority of our families are essential workers, which means that they are more exposed and prone to the virus as well as in a potentially compromised situation with just the economics of having an essential worker position. And then finally, a key importance here is that when you look at the Latinx population in Santa Clara, they represent 55% of the cases in Santa Clara when the population is only 25%. But for us, our Latinx population represents 45% for our students. And so we know that that's a great impact when you have 55% of your Latino population being impacted by the pandemic. And so those are just some highlights that we included as to what the impact has been for us. In terms of stakeholder engagement, you know, we talked about the surveys that we did back in the spring where we gathered and asked for information. We talked about the various community forums that we did to engage just in even our preparation for the fall opening. And then obviously these community forums that we're holding now. Talks about how we're continuing to offer our board meetings. And so in case folks are wondering, we continue to offer our board meetings via Zoom, and you're allowed to submit your questions as well as participate actively by raising your hand in those board meetings. The next piece here is just the response to the surveys that we received that we did in the spring that noted of key emphasis, the level of comfort with returning or reopening of our schools, the level of on-campus instruction that folks would be comfortable with, and then what it is that we were prioritizing, as well as what were some important structures. And so this came about from a survey that was conducted back in the spring, right around the ending of our school year, as we prepared for our planning for this particular school year. For us, currently we're not offering in-person instruction, but we do have a phased approach that we will be taking. As you can see here from the graphic, phase 1 is where we currently are, given that we are still on the state watch list. We hope to be able to move into phase 2, where we're able to provide some in-person instruction for our most at-need student populations, which include our students with disabilities, as well as our English learners, as two sample student populations. Maybe at some point, some sort of hybrid approach, once we're off the watch list and we've deemed it to be safe. And then there's a task force. Superintendent, would you like to talk a little bit more about the phase 3?
Yeah, phase 3 is an important piece to discuss because one thing you have to consider are what are the conditions necessary to have in place for us to say, you know, we're confident we can keep people safe and healthy when they come back to school. And it's also important that we try to stay away from comparing one district to another district. For instance, you know, we are a high school district, and our approach, if we were a K-12 district, would be much different if we had primary grades where you had a stable cohort of students with their teacher. And that's why there's a waiver process now for elementary schools to reopen. So what happens in Palo Alto, Los Gatos, Santa Clara may not be the same conditions on the east side. As Ms. Marquez mentioned, we have some of the highest COVID cases in several of our zip codes, and that's going to impact the decision to bring people back for in-person instruction. So we have a task force of 30 members of parents, students, teachers, classified employees, and they're going to be making a recommendation, and ultimately it will be the board of trustees who make the final decision. I'll give them a recommendation of when we think we can do phase 3, and then they'll ultimately make that decision. In terms of phase 4, full in-person back to how it was back in prior to March 16th. In all honesty, I just don't see that happening this year. I don't see full in-person instruction on a daily basis, 5 days a week, until there is a vaccine that's widely accessible. And it's not just the vaccine, but making it widely accessible. So we want to bring people back when it's safe, because we know there's nothing that replaces in-person instruction and in-person supports. But we're going to do it in a thoughtful and in a safe way.
Thank you, Mr. Funk. And then we get into the distance learning, which is currently the model that we are engaged in. And so a lot of these components here are asking for us to include our plans of how we are ensuring that our students have access to a full curriculum, as you can see here. And as I mentioned, we continue to offer the broad range of courses that we would normally offer any other year. For example, we continue to offer our art courses, our multimedia, our CTE courses, which are our career technical education courses. We even continue to offer our cooking courses that a couple of our sites offer. Mind you, they've had to adjust a little bit, and there has to be some simulations and some planning around that by the part of our teachers. But we continue to offer the full array of courses as in previous years, including AP classes, so to ensure that our students continue to be prepared for whatever their options are after they graduate from us. In terms of access to devices and connectivity, we've provided close to 4,000 hotspots, and we have more on order to continue to provide for those students and families who are in need of connectivity. We've issued close to 8,000 Chromebooks, and we have enough to issue additional ones for students who, situation may change and may now be in need of one. So we have enough devices to ensure that every one of our students has access to a device. We also have engaged in community Wi-Fi, which is now available in the James Lick and Oberfeld neighborhoods. Mr. Funk, would you like to add more details on the community Wi-Fi, please?
The Community Wi-Fi project is a project that's a partnership between Eastside and the city of San Jose. We have used our EdTech bond to help build the infrastructure so that our students, our families, and members of the community can access the city's Wi-Fi. Our students will access our system through the city's infrastructure, but they'll have their password and all the filters that are in place within Eastside. But community members will have access, just like if they were at the airport, to the city's Wi-Fi. Phase 1 was James Lick, Oberfeld, and currently Yerba Buena is underway. Phase 2 will be Independence, Andrew Hill, Oak Grove, and Phase 3 will be Mount Pleasant and the Silver Creek area. When it's all said and done, about 75% of our students will have access to that free Wi-Fi, and approximately 350,000 citizens of the city of San Jose will have access to the Wi-Fi. So we're pretty excited about that project.
Great, thank you, sir. And then the next largest component that I want to share with you is the actual schedule that we've engaged in, which many of you I'm sure are familiar, given that we're entering our third week of school with our students. And so here what you can see is we planned for a block schedule to allow for students to not feel overwhelmed, but still be able to have enough time with each of their courses to engage with that full access to curriculum as is what is expected. So you can see here that we've built in Monday, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Friday for actual direct, live, interactive instruction for students to be able to receive their instruction. Unfortunately, yes, not in person, but through video conferencing, still be able to have access to that full content within their courses, really emphasizing and focusing on the essential skills and standards for each of those subject areas. We've also built in the Wednesday for what we're calling asynchronous time or independent time for students to allow them to have that time to work on the various assignments and tasks that have been given to them from their classes, so that they have this dedicated time to be able to complete their assignments or access any online resources that are provided for them. And then additionally, we have built in on 3 different occasions an opportunity for students to receive additional support and help from their teachers through a tutorial advisory period, so that if they're struggling or feeling that they need additional support, or a teacher has assigned them for intervention, that is available here for them, so they can participate for a longer period here on Wednesdays, and then still an opportunity on Tuesdays and Fridays, so that they're able to receive that additional support that they need, so that they can find success in each of their content courses. And then finally, the last key component that I want to emphasize as part of this plan is the professional development that was done for our teachers. And so prior to the start of the school year, our teachers engaged in a number of various sessions, and we had quite a large participation of our teachers, so that they can better prepare themselves to be able to engage in the instruction in this new type of environment and setting. We had professional development sessions on how to video conference. Teachers selected whether it be Zoom or Google Meet. You could see we offered 21 sessions for each of those. Schooloo, Google Classroom. We even make sure to focus on how do you respond to the social emotional learning needs and relationship building for teachers. We offered 9 of those sessions. And how do you use assessments within this new setting? And you can see we were able to offer over 106 various learning sessions with close to 1,700 teachers having participated here. Additionally, we partnered with the Cross Center for Innovation to provide a more in-depth learning experience for teachers who wanted to dig a little deeper. And we were able to get funding for 100 of our teachers to participate in a 4-day, more intensive program focused on how do you communicate within a distance learning setting, how do you identify the workflow, and then how do you deliver your content. And then of course we had multiple sessions in collaboration with our SELPA to support our teachers who are providing services for our students with disabilities. And so these are the key components that I wanted to highlight for you as part of this community forum. As you can see, there's other components that still have not been completely flushed out. And that's where I want to make sure that I do provide an opportunity to have you provide, whether it's a question or input, as something that you'd like to see us further flesh out as part of this plan, or just even a general question when it comes to our the learning continuity and attendance and our plan that we have so far this year as we enter the 3rd week, and how we're providing the learning for your students. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen sharing and come back to the Q&A.
I think I'm all caught up, Ms. Marquez, on the Q&A.
Okay. So at this time, I just want to go ahead and open it up to any further input, whether it's in the chat or if you raised your hand. If you have a question or would like to share a comment on the direction that we're taking with our learning continuity and attendance plan. Okay, I'm seeing that there are no further questions to address, and I don't see any hands up. So at this time, that's the information that I was oh, I see a hand up. Mr. Carlos Bearfield, let me allow you to talk here. Give me 1 second. Yes, Mr. Bearfield.
He still has his mute on.
Can you unmute, sir, please?
Thank you. It wouldn't let me unmute, so thank you for doing that. Thanks for the opportunity. My question is just around disciplinary actions for kids that are disruptive on the Zoom or whatever meeting, video meetings.
Yeah, so we actually are continuing to have teachers record any kind of inappropriate behavior in our system, our behavior referral system. We've adapted our uniform behavior responses to allow for obviously the difference in being physically present to being in a Zoom setting. And so we continue to work with our advisors who work with students when there is an inappropriate behavior. Teachers still have the option if the behavior is inappropriate and so egregious that it's interrupting the learning to remove a student from class, and we're calling that an in-class suspension, just like we normally would if the students were in person and a student was disruptive. The teacher would complete a behavior referral and they would have the consequence available to them of being able to suspend their student from their class for up to 2 days. And then our advisors would then interfere, obviously communicate with parents about the behavior, and then work with the student to re-engage them so that they understand the appropriate behaviors. Our teachers have been clearly told, and we're doing constant reminders about the security features with video conferencing. And so we're continuously encouraging them to make sure to stick to the default settings we have placed. And so it's really important too for us when teachers are doing their video conferencing to make sure that students are logging in using their Eastside Union High School District email, because that has built in securities when they're able to log in through our system, so that it prevents some of the Zoom bombing that may have it, or some of that inappropriate behavior.
Let me jump to the Q&A, and there's a question back to children with IEP and just some more clarity requested. And so let me just say that whatever supports are outlined in the IEP and it was for in-person, we will also continue to provide that support through distance learning. And so if they have a paraprofessional that's assigned to them in their IEP, that para will be assigned to them via distance learning, and they'll be able to be part of the class. They'll be able to go into a breakout room and provide extra support. That's why we also have our Tuesdays and Fridays advisory and tutorials, and then the Wednesday afternoon. So you should expect the same type of supports, albeit it'll be distance learning, through distance learning that you would have if you were in person. And so as Ms. Marquez mentioned, please contact your program specialist, your IEP teacher directly for that extra support. There's questions around our block schedule, and not all schools are in a block schedule, although we already have 5 of our schools that had a block schedule prior to COVID-19. And really the issue is twofold here for our teachers and for our students. To have kids and our teachers online every single day, 5 days a week for 6 periods, that's just going to be a lot of screen time, and that's going to create some trauma. And so the reason why we wanted to create the block schedule was, one, so that teachers did not just quickly go through the curriculum and that they could really focus on the key standards and deliver them, going really deep with the understanding, and then providing opportunities for kids that get it quickly. They can leave the class and start working, and teachers can stay with students that need the extra support. A student that left the class is starting to work independently and runs into a problem, knows that they can now go back and see their teacher. If you just had 55-minute classes for 6 periods a day, a student would never be able to go back and see their teacher. And conversely, it's awfully hard to teach every day, all day, through distance learning, particularly when we're not requiring students to use their video. When a teacher sees a blank screen sometimes, that's hard to stay engaged, and it's hard to monitor how well students are doing. So we believe that going Monday and Tuesday with a Wednesday opportunity for collaboration, an opportunity for ongoing professional development, and an opportunity for large group discussions, particularly with counselors and our seniors around financial aid and applications, college applications. We believe that this schedule will benefit both the students and our teachers. And yes, for those that have never taught or learned in a block schedule, there will be an adjustment period. And then we'll look at the semester. We'll reevaluate, and if we need to adjust in the spring, we will adjust. One of the things that we know for sure is once we open up school, we already have criteria for closing schools that the governor has set. For instance, once we're in-person learning, if one student in a class catches COVID-19, that entire class has to go for a 14-day quarantine period. If 5% of a school has COVID-19, the entire school has to go on quarantine for 14 days. And if 25% of the school district catches COVID-19, the entire district has to quarantine for a minimum of 14 days. And so with scientists talking about a second wave of COVID-19 coming with the new flu season, the chances are school districts across California are going to have to shut down once again. And so we want to be consistent with the schedule that we have without it changing weekly or every 14 days or what have you. So we will reevaluate at the semester, and if we need to make adjustments, we will.
Thank you. There's another question, and we'll take maybe 2 more questions to honor everyone's time. Is there a reason why teachers don't want to record their session so kids don't fall? So we cannot mandate by ed code, that's actually ed code law. We cannot mandate teachers to record their sessions. However, many of them are recording them when a student is absent, and they can only use it for that particular period. So if I as a teacher have a period 2 and I record my session, I can only use it for the purpose of supporting students within that class. We cannot mandate it, as that is educational law, but teachers can, if they feel a need to record their session because they've noticed that students are absent. Additionally, parents have a right to opt their student out of that recording. And so we have to make sure that those pieces are in place for protective factors for both the teacher and the students. There's a question on the SAT. SAT is dictated and run by the College Board. And currently we are unable to offer the, the PSAT, the SAT as we've done in the past because of the limitations with group size gathering. Currently, Mr. Funk, if you could help me out with this particular answer, I believe that this particular class of seniors is not being required to have the SAT as part of their college admissions.
That's correct. And as soon as we come off the watch list, the Santa Clara County watch list, we still will only be able to have certain sizes that can be tested, but we will have the ability then to open up more of our space to allow for more testing. So, if there's time before December to do that, we're going to do that. But right now, it just does not meet the social gathering guidelines of Santa Clara County.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to go ahead and say thank you for joining us this morning. We hope that we were able to provide to you the information in regards to our direction and our plan for responding to the various components of the learning continuity and attendance plan. And again, just remind you that we do so in an understanding that This is new and for everyone, and we're continuing to adjust, and it's a work in progress for us, but we do appreciate the feedback, the questions, and please reach out to your school sites or to us here at the district office should you have a specific concern that we can assist you with. So thank you very much for joining us. This concludes our webinar.